Shalom and welcome to a new live stream from Israel for Fred, MIF. MIF is the largest pro-Israel membership group that is non-religious and non-partisan in Europe. And we are proud to announce that next week we will even start information work in German language. So hang on and you will get more information. Joining me today is Eran Teboul. Eran is the Chief Executive Officer of Hetz of Israel and a longtime friend of MIF and myself. He joined our conference in Norway in 2022. Eran, finally.
Thank you. Good to be here, and I thank all of our friends in Norway and elsewhere who are supporting MIF. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much.
We have both been quite busy last two years, so it's good to catch up again. And there's a lot of things happening, and you can speak in detail to what is happening in Gaza and in counterterrorism in Europe, and also a little bit about what's going on in Israeli politics. So maybe let me start with quite an open question. Where do you see Israel is going after the 7th of October?
Well, it's a great question. I think that the 7th of October is not a point in time that we can separate from other developments that preceded it. Let me just remind the audience that in the past 5 years or so that preceded October 7th, we've had about 5 rounds of elections, domestic elections, with draw or near draw results. And there's been a lot of tensions that are happening within the Israeli society. At the same time, we've been witnessing probably since 1979, the focus of Iran's aspirations to become a dominant power in the Middle East on the expense of Egypt and on the expense of Saudi Arabia. And part of the main obstacles that Iran had in mind was to remove Israel as a competitor. And it has built a huge arsenal of missiles and then, of course, drones, and has built a number of proxies around Israel. The combination of tensions that are, by the way, are historically evident within the Israeli people and the Jewish people. That is the tension between the universalist perspective and the nationalist perspective, that it has always been a healthy tension, has come to a boiling point at around the same time that the Iranians, so to speak, strangling position was almost maturing. But unfortunately for the Iranians, October 7th has been an uncoordinated attack by Hamas. They had seen their own opportunity to start the move and have other proxies joined according to the original plan, but their success was very local, and actually, comparing to the Gaza front, it was too big a success. So just to put things in context, the October 7th timing was not coincidental. It had a correlation with boiling points within the Israeli society. Now, October 7th as itself was the opening strike of the Iron Swords war. And as we know, the opening strike is a very significant part of the war. If you have the element of surprise, there's a lot you can do. You can look at the 12 days in June and see that the number one, the first day, actually dictated the rest of the war, the current round with Iran. So Hamas had a huge success and caught us unprepared. The Israeli military was prepared for a very similar scenario in the northern front. Very similar scenario by all means, only in a larger scale and across a larger border than the Gaza Strip. So October 7th has actually resulted in a kind of a wake-up call with a lot of pain for the Israeli people, but an understanding that we are actually fighting our war of independence. And let me just draw some kind of a scenario. It was a very possible scenario. Imagine that on October 7th, Hezbollah would have joined the war and infiltrate our borders from the north. And at the same time, will be joined by some radical factions within the Israeli Arabs that we know they are a minority, but there are some factions who are radical and would have loved to couple with Hezbollah's effort. Add to this the Arabs of Judea and Samaria, the Palestinian Arabs in the so-called West Bank, and we have a very, very, very bad party. And that's not to mention, and we know it for certain, Shiite militias who were going to join and come from Iraq through Syria, that Syria was then pro-Iranian and pro-Shiite, and enter Israel from either Jordan or Syria. And this would have been a devastating catastrophe, something that we were preparing for. But when an opening strike for such a war catches you off guard, there's a lot of balance that is broken and very, very hard to reverse the opening day. But back to reality, what really happened is that Hezbollah was deterred and was actually surprised by what was happening in Gaza. And Hezbollah's main perspective was to create a gradual balance where they dictate the pace of the war. They were not just waiting to see what's going on. They were actually planning to join, but at their time and their condition, if the conditions are allowing. And of course, they were saving their main arsenal for a scenario where Israel is attacking Iran, and they will be joining the Iranians in a counterattack to protect Iran. That's their initial and primary soul or raison d'être. So what really happened is that Israel, first of all, balanced with enough troops the northern border, while at the same time piling up troops around Gaza. It took about 3 weeks to enter Gaza physically, and there's been numerous reasons for why the IDF had to wait. Not only to clear up the territories inside Israel from Hamas terrorists who infiltrated, and some of them have lasted for about 3 weeks, only carrying a few dates and a little bit of water, hiding in bushes. So the other reason was to make sure that we have some control of the relationship of what's happening in the northern border, so we can deploy the reserve battalions and divisions into Gaza. And the battle in Gaza is still developing. It's still in the making. The initial form of fighting was a full-scale, full-power fighting, trying to create as much achievements in a very short term, and to bring create some kind of conditions for a hostage and exchange deal that we saw happening in November. From there, there's been a lot of trial and error forms of battle that brought us to where we are today, mainly taking control of approximately 65% of the Gaza Strip and still working on the current plan, which, of course, we cannot elaborate too much.
No. I was going to ask you about the next few weeks. So according to...
Please do.
Again, yeah, so there are many media reports indicating that Israel is planning and building up forces to do a clearing of Hamas even in Gaza City. Maybe you could explain to Scandinavian viewers why IDF thinks that's a necessary move.
Well, so far, most of the operations, and I'm talking about the in-depth operation, meaning that when a military force is entering particular territory, let's say Jabalia, for instance, the IDF has been there already 3 times, and the first 2 times were mainly, triggering Hamas combatants, terrorists, to come out and face us face to face and eliminating them. But what we disregarded at the first 2 times was the scale and the scope of the infrastructure. the underground infrastructure and above the ground infrastructure. It's a combination of tunnels and networks of cameras and many spotters who are portraying to be innocent civilians, while actually serving as probably the best mechanism for Hamas military efforts is the disguise of civilians from elderly to children as spotters. Very, very effective mechanism. It's a combination of people and cameras all the way to tiny back of your car reverse cameras, okay? That are hidden in many, many places. So the current form of battle is actually complete, full-scale operation that includes the full destruction of infrastructure. So in any event, in any case that the IDF is withdrawing, there'll be a lot of work to try and restore the infrastructure, especially now with about 2 years of blocking the Hamas from having supplies to restore their infrastructure. So the current position, and it is still not clear whether a full-scale operation is going to take place into Gaza, but the idea is that the IDF has already went into northern Gaza at the beginning, and then to the Gaza City, to some parts of it, to most part of it, but at the initial form of battle, that is without going deeply into the infrastructure. And then the IDF moved on into Rafah, to the southern border, just to make sure that we are blocking the way to smuggle in and out, whether it is people or means. And the operations there are still taking place, but were done in a way that is also taking into the account the scale, the mother of all tunnels. That is Rafah. This is what they call it, and there's been hundreds of tunnels crossing the border there. Then the IDF has established a kind of alternative mechanism to deploy foods and supplies. At the beginning, there was the truck system. Then they were using the parachuting supplies, not this time, but there were other times before, by the Jordanians, by the Emirates, by the Americans. And the last part was once this area of southern Gaza Strip was stabilized, it allowed also some sort of enabling supplies and humanitarian aid going to the civilians while separating them from Hamas. And we all know about the Yasser Abu Shabaab's militias and how they are able to provide what is necessary without using their force for terrorism. So the last part was IDF going into the area of Khan Yunis and the central camps, which used to be mostly humanitarian zone and are now reorganized. And the last stronghold of Hamas is the Gaza City and the neighborhood that surrounds it, such as Zaytun, Dar Tufah, and some of the central camps.
Yeah. And does Hamas have organized battalions ready, waiting for you there?
Well, I cannot refer to any intelligence or anything that I can only refer to what is known in public, obviously. But it is already known that in most areas of the Gaza Strip, the structure of the military organization is broken. The leadership is broken, and the middle ranks are already been switched several times. So there's no real organization and coordination between the central command and the different factions that are left around the Gaza Strip. Having said that, it is only logical to understand that there's been a long time for Hamas to reorganize whatever it is left in the Gaza City. And the Gaza City is far more complicated, having multi-floor buildings, more than 10 floors, and a lot of above ground infrastructure that enabled reorganizing and hiding and reorganizing the battalions for defense, not for offense, but mostly for defense. That just makes sense that that's the situation right now.
Yeah.
and of course, having enough places to hide the live and the deceased murdered hostages.
Mm. You mentioned briefly the 12 days war in June. Um, could you have imagined that? Like, I don't see. We both know that the war with Iran is not finished. I guess, but would you have been able to imagine that this first battle would be so successful that it was?
Well, I know for certain from people that I've met who were part of the planning team and a senior part of the planning team that the scenario was not even coming close to the success that the IDF experienced
Yeah.
in the operation in Iran. And just to put things in context, I mean, all the way to Iran was a hostile territory and still is, but the change that we saw following the success rate in Lebanon, and every part of it is connected to another, but not necessarily originally planned. So the collapse of Hezbollah, and especially their motivation to act against Israel after the Pagers' successful operation and after eliminating their spiritual leader and of course also operational leader Hassan Nasrallah, along with his senior command. And after the shock of seeing people blowing up all around Lebanon with their pagers and then with their walkie-talkies, the panic could be seen easily by just pedestrians who saw people throwing televisions and air conditions from their windows, fearing that they will blow up as well. So the freezing, that's a freeze, right? Fight, flight, freeze. So the freezing of Hezbollah enabled the spinning of Syria from the Assad Alawite regime into the current Ashara, and still to be seen. Current regime, of course, inspired by ISIS operatives. That's a very separate discussion. But our ability to take advantage of the shift and take out in about 48 hours about 80% of Assad's military capabilities enabled us to move swiftly into Iran. And of course, there's been other raids that were preceding this attack after the last launching of about 300 missiles and projectiles to Israel from Iran. So the combination of having a clear way to Tehran and having the element of surprise, all coordinated, different strikes at the same second, not minute, not day, but the same second, was a major success. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That was amazing, and also strategically, it's very important that you got the American administration joining you for the first time. The U.S. joined Israel in a war. How do you?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu, in that particular point, was very careful and really perhaps led the way, but in no way pressured the Americans to act. But just to remind our audience that those mega bombs that were developed, they were developed particularly to those reactors, to the Fordow nuclear facility. So they had the Americans had the motivation and they had the means. It was only a matter of conditions and timing. Of course, we created the conditions. The timing was a result of the ultimatum, 60 days ultimatum that President Trump gave to the Iranians. And on the 61 day, we created the conditions that led the Americans to do it for their own interest.
Let's turn now to a little bit of what's happening in Europe, and just want to give you a taste of what happened in Norway this year. So last Saturday there was a Jewish association that had a gathering, just the celebration in the one of the western suburbs of Oslo. not even a suburb. It's quite central, like a high-end place, and they rented a place there. And then there was a influencer. She had studied at Georgetown University, actually, so probably radicalized in the US. So she said in a TikTok video basically that please do not rent out the meeting hall, the event place, to Jews one more time. Please don't rent out to Jews.
Yeah.
And she was also complaining. She was a neighbor, and she didn't like that they had to use more than 20 policemen to look after 5 so-called peaceful demonstrators against. So first of all, these demonstrators were not peaceful at all. One of them tried to enter the event with a false name, and yeah. So, but when Myth exposed this yesterday, she quickly pulled back and she said, "Oh, I didn't mean that, because I pointed out that this was similar to the laws that the Nazis enacted in 1938 and 1939, denying Jews the right to rent wherever they liked, etc." So she understood that she had done something wrong. But then I looked back in her TikTok history, and then the 30th of October 2023, like 2 or 3 days after Israel entered the Gaza Strip with ground forces, she accused Israel of genocide.
Yeah.
So it's just an illustration of how these false demonization of Israel is turning to like write out Jew hatred from a very high educated young woman in Norway.
Right. So I'm very familiar with such examples from other countries. Most recently in Holland, that there's been different venues that were bullied to back off from a commitment to rent their venue to the Jewish community. We know it from other places too. And I don't think this is a coincidental events. Both you and I are history fans, and I think that the story of Israel, the unique story, and when I say unique, there are different unique stories, but Israel is one unique story, is not the cause for what's happening in Europe against Jews. The story of what's happening in Europe is also a local domestic story, or a Western story. But to go back historically to the post-World War I evolvement of the Western European society, and I emphasize Western because Central Europe and Eastern Europe has developed in a different fashion. And I think that a lot of the shock of post-World War has resulted in probably 2 main vectors. The first vector is having to do with letting go of God and belief in Europe, and the removal of the church for many reasons, some of them good, some of them aren't, but the removal of faith as a central part of European culture. And I will refer to this in a second, and the implications of it. The second part is having to do with diplomacy, and using diplomacy as the ultimate tool to resolve conflicts, and the ability to use force was actually removed from the table. Now, in terms of high up values, it sounds great, but in reality, if your enemies or your adversaries don't obey to the same kind of moral guidance, so in one hand, you'll have a society who's trying to appease everything by using diplomacy and non-violent means to resolve conflicts. And on the other hand, you'll have a society or a culture that will pile up weapons and will advance their weapons and invest a lot of their capital and GDP into developing the future weapons for a conflict. And then you have a lack of balance between Samuel Huntington's, Clash of Civilizations, the thin line between the post-Cold War different blocks. So those two different vectors, one, the removal of belief as a central part of European society, and the removal of the use of force as another tool, not the ultimate tool, but another tool to resolve conflicts, had led us to a European society. And of course, excuse me for generalizing, because we know there are different parts in Europe, and even within Western Europe, there are different representations. Yeah. But it has led us to a situation where Israel, which is a country in which a belief and the national identity is a central part, and is a country who's surrounded by well-armed and equipped enemies who are trying to remove it from the map, is representing everything and anything that the European has repelled since World War II. Another element of, and particularly around the removal of faith as a key component, is that families who has a component of belief in their identity normally would not count their children as expenses on their bookkeeping Excel sheets. And so they will reproduce and have larger families. And we've seen it in Italy decades ago, only a few decades ago, with 8 and 10 members in one family. And Italy now only has 1.1 reproduction rate. In Germany, it's also below 2. And the European society has been shrinking while opening their borders to immigrants from different cultures with different perspectives about how to resolve conflicts and how to bring about their culture, larger families. And it's a combination of different epicenters in their codex of values and a change in the political base and the components of the political base that is also resulting in policy. And we know that policy is also a backwind for activism, and it's kind of a mechanism that drives itself.
So do you think it will get worse in Europe for Jews or friends of Israel?
Well, there's something that we've been seeing since the early 2010s, and there's a counter movement that is building up. And there's the good elements of it, and there's the old elements, but we need to focus on the positive elements first. So we have the idea of nationality, that is the identity that is connected to your history, territory, and unique components of your culture, that is making a comeback. And it's very natural. It's basic physics. When you push something towards one end, it goes back to the other hand and applies the same pressure to the other direction. So it's been about a decade and a half that those movements are gaining more momentum in Europe. You can see it in France, and you can see it in Germany, and you can see it in Austria. In the UK, it is still going to one direction extremely and another direction extremely. Of course, they have their own Brexit component that resulted in a very unique dynamic. But in Norway, I think it is very dominant that in most recent election rounds across Western societies, and mainly in Europe, but not only, there is a near draw situation. So the blocks are becoming almost equal, and the same blocks not a long time ago were shifting from one end to another. So I think it could get worse. And when you push someone to the corner, of course, the natural reactions are becoming more aggressive. And I think we will see more aggressive acts after September, when the UN General Assembly, which of course is not committing, it's a non-binding quorum, but will pass a resolution to acknowledge Palestine as a state, led by the UK and France, of course, and Australia and Canada joining them. And I believe this will result in a backwind for domestic activism. And when I say activism, there is a very slippery slope between activism and peaceful demonstration and physical attacks. And I suspect, unfortunately, that we're going to see more and more shift, and a bigger shift from demonstrations to physical attack against Jews and Jewish symbols in Europe.
Mm-hmm. A lot of Norwegian taxpayer money has gone to the Palestinian Authority and, of course, also to UNRWA. And after some countries froze or stopped their funding for UNRWA last year, when it got more exposed how closely they were connected to Hamas, Norway pushed on and gave even more than ever. Maybe you can speak a little bit about what, like when Israel entered houses and institutions in the Gaza Strip, all the intelligence you gathered show more in detail the connection between UNRWA and the terrorist groups. Maybe you could expand a little bit about that.
Well, I think that Hamas, since October 7th, was not really doing a good job trying to disguise and hide the connection between its operations and UNRWA. There's been a lot of lists of operatives and their affiliation with particular fighting battalions of Hamas, of people who are hired by UNRWA. Mm-hmm. So UNRWA actually served, among other purposes, as kind of a fungible or a money avenue for fungible funds, meaning that I will pay you for being a teacher, but when we need you as to cross the border into Israel and to slaughter and kidnap, you are going to join us. And this is particularly what happened. We know of several cases of Hamas terrorists who were infiltrating Israel, kidnapping, murdering, who are affiliated with UNRWA. But that's not the only case. I mean, UNRWA, that's the easiest example is that UNRWA's bags for rice, so just plastic bags, were used to pile up sand to protect the fortress and strongholds of Hamas. But there are numerous examples of how UNRWA paid operatives used as Hamas fighters or other clerics, and other examples that are infinite. Those are, and not to mention, of course, their role as teachers for incitement and for recruitment of potential Hamas fighters when they are teenagers. We've all seen it throughout the years with Hamas military camps for children during the summertime.
Yeah. So funding to Gaza has not only come from governments in Norway, governments in Europe, but also, I guess, from citizens and through NGOs, etc. How do you know how much of the Gaza economy that was kind of held up by donations from Muslim charities and other? I mean, even me, many times after 7th of October, I got YouTube videos asking me to support Muslim charities for Gaza. I have to admit that I was not their most relevant customer, but how is this network working, and is there a way where to kind of stop the funding that's going directly to the terrorists and help? Because I'm all for that the civilians get help, and how can that be separated?
Well, going back to the beginning of your question, what is the percentage? It's really hard to say, but there's an estimate of about 10 to 15% of the goods, mainly goods that going into Gaza, are being taxed. So to 10 to 15% by Hamas. So for every dollar that someone is paying for food or for equipment, so you'll get 10 to 15 cents to Hamas, and that's a huge number. But going back to the humanitarian support, so Hamas, and not only Hamas, but Islamist movements have used the Western and particularly the European system of humanitarian aids and the ability to incorporate yourself as a charity as a very effective tool for fundraising. And in recent years, of course, the blockchain different currencies have also provided a good way to funnel money into Hamas and into Gaza. Particularly referring to the humanitarian part, there was one very prominent example of a French charity called Humanitaire. And one of their, what do you call them, like mule trucks, a small electric truck was caught in a tunnel underneath UNRWA's facility outside Gaza City in the El Zaytun neighborhood. And this was a contribution with their logo that ended up using Hamas. It is really hard to tell where your money goes. And in some cases, of course, the money uses for good purposes, but in others, you have no idea to control what the money is being used for. So they may provide you with some nice videos and pictures, and we know that they have the best producers. And if you want to get nice, heartbreaking pictures, some of them authentic, some of them completely aren't, you can get them in Gaza. And if you won't find them in Gaza, you'll get some pictures from Syria, and it will be labeled as Gaza pictures. Anyway, the money keeps flowing in, and the way to block it is actually very complicated. It is more accurate to say that you can sabotage those efforts by exposing them, but the ability to then open up a different foundation or a different charity in Europe, or to move it to another country, and to use different names for asylum seekers who are operating those charities is very simple. So the best way to be able to address the humanitarian needs of Gazan citizens is through the GHF zones, secure and safe zones for distribution of food and aid. We are very much familiar with their efforts and the people who are involved. The efforts are peaceful. People are standing in a line, enjoying what they're receiving. We're talking about more than 100 million meals already served since June. So there's no real shortage of food. We're seeing day-to-day videos coming out of Gaza by Gazans of anything that you can imagine. I think they have more food than you can have access to in Oslo. That I can guarantee. Maybe not the same selection, but enough meat and sweets and anything that you can come across in a normal average country.
Yeah, but do you admit that parts of Gaza had lack of food going back a few weeks, or you don't agree to those estimates?
Well, the estimates and the numbers have been proved to be cooked, if I may say. So any estimate that's coming from the Hamas Ministry of Health is twisted, because they control the narrative and they control the numbers, and you have no way to back their numbers. And there are many cases in which we were able to prove them wrong. And when it's coming back to the UN, I'd say groups, and particularly the most recent report about hunger or famine in Gaza, the numbers make no sense. And of course, they had to change the criteria so that their narrative and political aspirations, political agenda fits the definition. So let's say that I would like to have an interview with someone in Norway who's 6 feet 3 and wearing glasses, and it has nothing to do with the content. So I'll find someone to fit what I need, and then we'll speak about whatever I want. I'm changing the criteria for it to fit the story that I want to tell, and we've seen it again and again with the UN. The same goes for their aspiration to blame or accuse Israel for genocide. They had to replace the most recent czar of genocide prevention, Alice Nedritu, and I'm sorry if I don't pronounce her name properly, but Alice worked for the UN for decades, and her mandate was genocide prevention. Her background had to do with conflict resolutions, and she came out clearly with the numbers and the data saying whatever the IDF is doing in Gaza is all but a genocide. There's no genocide there. It doesn't even come close to the definition of a genocide. So they let her go and they hired someone else. And now they're changing the definition to make it fit so that they can come up with a declaration that Israel is committing genocide. And of course, this goes hand in hand with the ICC and the ICJ investigations against war crimes. It's a mechanism that really abuses the original mandate that it received after the World War II.
Last year, I think, less than a year, in May last year, I think I met former Israeli general, and I asked him what's the biggest mistake Israel did during the war. And now there has been even one more year, and wherever there are humans, there failures happen, and errors are happening strategically and tactically. What do you think are some of the most serious errors that was made on the Israeli side?
Well, I don't think it's it's a mechanism of errors and mistakes versus successes. I think that the battlefield that the IDF has faced in Gaza is something like there's no example that even resembles it in history. We're talking about a highly populated area with a network of hundreds of kilometers of underground infrastructure. And then every house, every building, every institution that we, as a Western Judeo-Christian society, consider as sacred, such as hospitals and schools, kindergarten, and worship and prayers houses, has been turned into a military camp. And when I say turned into a military camp, it means that it's either booby-trapped or next to every window there will be an RPG launcher and other weapons. So we're not talking about a regular, ordinary battlefield where you have the military camps and then the civilians. Everything is separated, different locations. Everything here is embedded, and we're talking about drones and then civilians and then, so to speak, protected institutions or protected entities, shielded entities like journalists and medical staff. All of them are embedded within Hamas. And to add to that, the complexity of having our own hostages held and hidden in different places that we consider very sensitive, and we do everything in our power and not to come close to it and God forbid to damage and to hurt them, makes it the most difficult battlefield in the fight of urban warfare. And I don't compare it to the D-Day and Normandy because it's a different type of a battlefield that is it is only military, of course, besieged. and with its own complexities. But with urban warfare, there's no other example that resembles it. And at the same time, the ratio of non-involved casualties is the lowest ever seen in battlefield. So I think just to refer to some cases as mistakes, there's been many tragedies, but it's war. And I think that if you look overall at what happened since October 7th, and of course with the other fronts, and we will see sure enough and soon enough we'll see the results of what happened yesterday in Yemen, in Sana'a. I think that there's been a very, very high rate of success. There's still a lot of challenges to face in Gaza, and I think that a growing challenge is what's happening with Jewish communities across the world, primarily in Western countries.
Yeah. Do you have 10 or 15 more minutes, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Let's turn then to Judea and Samaria, and of course now the Israeli government has approved building in E1 area, and some voices say that Israel may respond to the recognition of Palestine in the UN in September by declaring sovereignty of parts of Judea and Samaria. What's happening there, and what do you think will happen in the next few months?
Right. So I would like to refer to it from a security perspective and not from political or even a historical or moral perspective, because that's my expertise and that's my mandate. So I think post October 7th, Israel and Israelis understood, and if it wasn't clear after the Oslo Accords and the aftermath of the Oslo Accords in 1995, suicide bombers, 1996, so on and so forth, and of course the Second Intifada, where our own Palestinian counterparts that were doing joint patrols, and I've seen it with my own eyes as a young 18-year-old soldier, turned their guns against us. I think that Israelis and the Israeli security establishment has turned into becoming more sober and more strategic about securing this tiny piece of land between the river and the sea, and the ability to see in a clear way that we don't have a partner, a central partner for a Palestinian state or whatever this may mean, is now more clear than ever. Mahmoud Abbas did not condemn October 7th, and he had many opportunities. And actually, he's saying things the other way when he speaks in Arabic. That's his style. We know that he's bilingual, meaning he doesn't speak English and Arabic. He speaks one time what he means, and another time what he wants people to hear. And Israel now has a right-wing government who sees this also an ideological opportunity to block the aspirations of the Palestinians for a state running from Hebron through Bethlehem all the way to Ramallah, Kalkilia, Tulkarem, Nablus, and Jenin, the main cities. And of course, there's Jericho, but Jericho is just a tiny 20,000 inhabitants town. Many people consider it a city, but it's a small place. So the way to block this aspiration and to actually divide what we know today as the Palestinian Authority into local, perhaps self-controlled territories, perhaps, and I'm saying perhaps because this still needs to be put in test, is more evident than before. And in terms of the chessboard, I think that this declaration, first and foremost, is kind of a balancing tool to the declaration of a Palestinian state that is coming up next month. Whether it is going to be materialized into actually building a neighborhood, it is still yet to be seen. There's a lot of time, and it's not going to take. Even it's funny because in Israeli bureaucracy, even if they approve it tomorrow and they even allocate the funds, it's still going to take 5 to 10 years to build anything there.
And we've been waiting for 30 years. But
Right.
I think this time it's a bit different because Israel has allowed themselves to be pressured not to build and go forward with development from European countries like France and Great Britain and even Norway. But nowadays, whatever is said in Oslo or London and Paris is not that important in Jerusalem anymore, it seems like.
Well, we do pay attention to what our friends tell us, but when it comes to a point where it compromises our security in the most delicate time of the history of the state of Israel, you sometimes have to tell your friends, I respectfully disagree, and thank you for your concern. It is as if I'll give you advice on your marriage, and you will tell me, listen, Eran, I love you, and we're still friends. But I disagree, and I'll do what I want in my household and what's good for me.
So, how is the security development, say in Samaria, these last 6 months, for example? I mean, I know that last year after the 7th of October, violence spiked a bit, but I since so many other issues are overshadowing the reports from the towns and villages of Samaria, I don't really know the development, but I feel maybe that Israel has got more control over the terrorist groups, is it? And that there is less violence, attacks on Israelis driving the roads or on the communities, or is that wrong?
Well, overall, there's been a huge spike of attacks and incidents against Israelis beyond the Green Line. So in Judea and Samaria, it's what people like to call the West Bank, the biggest bank of the biggest river in the world, which is doesn't come even close to a small creek in Norway. But there's been a spike in incidents where it is throwing rocks, which is deadly. People don't really appreciate it, but it's a deadly weapon. Stabbing and shooting, and of course some explosives. But Israel has took on a more proactive approach to prevent and to destroy those terror camps within the refugee camps, particularly in Tulkarem and Jenin, but most recently also in Nablus and a little bit in Hebron as well, mostly camouflaged or disguised operations by the Duvdevan unit and the likes. I know for certain that the motivation of the terrorists is still high, but they have a huge challenge when it comes to their supplies. A lot of supplies have been shut down in many ways, some I cannot disclose. But we know for certain that there are other avenues to bring in weapons, and if you just look from a physical perspective at the borders of Israel, when most of them are blocked, there's no vacuum, and a lot of the operations and the focus of the Iranians particularly is to transfer weapons into Judea and Samaria and into Gaza using drones from our largest borders, that is from Egypt, through Bedouins who are smuggling weapons into Hebron, and also through Jordan directly into the Palestinian towns. It's a huge challenge. There are many ways to tackle it and to address it, and the system is learning and implementing too. But the motivation is still there. The only difference is that when we are there and we have boots on the ground, and we have no other options. By the way, it is right here behind me. It's so close. So we have the way to see and hear and have the intelligence. And also local partners to be there before they attack us. And of course, there's always the challenge and you probably know it from Europe as well, the challenge of lone wolves who just decide to go, to come out of their apartment with a knife and start stabbing people in the streets. We've seen it again and again, mostly in Europe affiliated with ISIS, but in Israel, those are lone wolves, not necessarily acting on behalf of any organization.
Yeah. Maybe you should open it for some questions from the viewers. So if the viewers have any questions, Merete asks, how many of the tunnels in Gaza are still intact, and have Israel destroyed any of the tunnels within the Gaza city already?
Well, there's been some networks of tunnels destroyed in the Gaza city around November, December, January. But I'd say I estimate that perhaps at most 40% of the tunnel network was destroyed so far. So there's at least 60% of the network, that's hundreds of kilometers, yet to be destroyed across the Gaza Strip.
What's the most common way that they are destroyed? Is it by placing explosives in the whole distance of the tunnel within it, or on top of it?
There's been two main ways to destroy the tunnels. And there's a process. It includes mapping the tunnel using electronic devices that go in and really mapping the tunnel, and then the actual destruction of it. The two primary ways are, one, using a material that's called bentonite, and it's kind of a concrete that floods in massive amounts, and it actually blocking the tunnel completely. And it hardens in a gradual way, so it can get all the way to the end of the tunnel and only then materialize and become hard enough not to crack. The second way is using a liquid explosive called emulsia or emulsia in Hebrew, that the tunnels are being flooded first and then explode from a distance. Yeah.
I see. Do you think that there will be an election in Israel before autumn 26?
I don't know, and I don't want to guess. And I just said to the audience, don't refer any political questions to me, because I'm not a political expert in no way.
Yeah.
And I have an opinion like everyone else.
Israel is playing Norway in the soccer World Championship qualifier match, the 11th of October. Who do you think will win?
Well, I would like to say Israel, but the chances are very low if you look at the statistics. And Israel's soccer team that we appreciate and adore, they represent us. They still have a long way to go. The younger team, by the way, you'll have no chance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's up to 18. Yeah. Right.
So then you have a good generation coming up.
Yeah, in all fronts, by the way.
In
all fronts, a very good generation. I'm proud of it.
Yep. Eran, thanks a lot for joining us. It's refreshing to hear your analysis, and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. I wish you Shabbat Shalom from Israel, and all the best to the members of the MIFF and to the team. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. The best. Bye-bye.